The fire truck's siren blared in the morning silence as Cornell Bailey buttoned the last button of his uniform shirt. The 40-year-old firefighter, with his military bearing and calm, confident gaze, pulled on his gloves, nodded to his colleagues, and took his usual place in the truck. 15 years of service had made these movements automatic, turning his response to the alarm into a well-oiled machine where every gesture had a purpose and was performed with economical precision. The morning sun barely appeared above the horizon, painting the Columbus sky in soft pink tones. Cornell loved this time of day, a time of beginnings, a time of possibilities. In the early years of his marriage to Imani, they would sometimes greet the dawn together. They would sit on the porch with cups of hot coffee, watching the world wake up. Now those moments were just memories, growing fainter with each passing day, like old photographs fading in the sun. "Residential building on Oak Street," the dispatcher announced over the radio, bringing Cornell back to reality. "Possible casualties? Smoke on the second floor?" Cornell pulled on his protective helmet and mentally prepared himself for what lay ahead. He always did this. A few seconds of visualizing what he might encounter at the scene helped him focus and block out everything else. The hallways in a typical residential building, possible sources of ignition, evacuation routes, the location of fire hydrants in the area, all of this flashed through his mind, forming a clear picture. There had been a lot of unnecessary things lately. An empty house he didn't want to return to. A cold dinner left by his wife with a laconic note saying, "I'm late at work." The bed where he and Imani slept, turned away from each other as if they were strangers. Awkward pauses in conversation at breakfast. His wife's absent gaze when he told her about his day. All these little things added up to a painful picture of the slow death of their marriage. The fire truck, its siren blaring, pulled out onto the main street, and Cornell finally switched into work mode. Now only one thing mattered: saving someone's life, someone's home, someone's property from the merciless elements of fire. That was his strength, his calling, what he was truly good at. 4 minutes later, the fire brigade arrived at the scene. The 2-story wooden house, probably built in the 1970s, was already engulfed in flames. The fire was raging through the windows of the upper floor, and thick black smoke rose into the morning sky, resembling an ominous storm cloud. Neighbors gathered in the street, some crying, some filming the scene on their phones. Cornell was the first to jump out of the car and quickly made his way to the fire captain who had arrived earlier. "Are there people inside?" he asked, shouting over the noise of the fire hoses being rolled out and the roar of the flames. "An elderly couple on the first floor has been evacuated," replied the captain, a gray-haired man with a weather-beaten face, "but they say their daughter and child may still be upstairs." Cornell nodded, put on an oxygen mask, and without wasting a second, headed for the front door. One of the young firefighters followed him, but Cornell gestured for him to stay outside. "Cover me with the hose," he shouted over his shoulder. "I'll check the second floor." Inside, the house was filled with thick smoke and unbearable heat. Flames had already engulfed the staircase to the second floor, and the wooden steps were crackling, threatening to collapse at any moment. Cornell assessed the situation with a professional eye. He had no more than 3 minutes before the fire completely cut off his retreat. "Is anyone here? Fire department!" he shouted, methodically checking the rooms on the ground floor before going upstairs. In a back room, he found an elderly woman who, despite the previous evacuation, had returned to the house for something valuable and had lost consciousness from the smoke. Without wasting a second, Cornell picked her up and carried her out of the burning house, handing her over to the medics waiting outside. Then, ignoring the captain's warnings, he rushed back into the house and climbed the partially collapsed staircase to the second floor. The fire was particularly fierce here, with flames licking the walls and ceiling, and the air was so hot that even through his protective suit, Cornell could feel the burning heat. "Is anyone alive? Come on, say something!" he shouted, making his way through the smoke and flames. A faint cry of a child came from a distant room. Cornell rushed there and found a young woman clutching a small child to her chest. She was huddled in a corner, trying to protect the baby from the fire, but was already losing consciousness from the smoke. "Hold on, I'll get you out of here," Cornell said confidently, lifting the woman and child into his arms. The way back was completely cut off by the fire. Cornell looked around, assessing his options. The bedroom window faced the back of the house, where a fire ladder had already been set up. It was the only way to safety. Protecting the woman and child with his body, Cornell made his way to the window, broke the glass with his elbow, and carefully passed first the child and then his mother to his colleagues on the ladder. Only after making sure they were safe did he begin to climb down himself. At that moment, the ceiling of the room collapsed, and a wall of fire burst out. Cornell felt a burning pain in his back, but continued to climb down, gritting his teeth. Once on the ground, he handed the victims over to paramedics and finally allowed himself to drop to his knees, breathing heavily. His colleagues rushed to him, helping him remove his charred protective suit and administering first aid. "Bailey was the first in and the last out again," said one of the young firefighters respectfully, watching the medics treat the burns on Cornell's back. "That's why he's the best," replied another. 15 years on the job and not a single serious mistake. A true professional. Cornell didn't hear these words. His thoughts had already returned to the upcoming report, to analyzing the cause of the fire, to what could have been done better. He refused to be hospitalized, insisting that the burn was not serious, and returned to work, helping his colleagues localize the fire. The flames receded reluctantly, but after an hour, the fire was extinguished, and the team began to clear the debris and search for possible smoldering spots. The cause was faulty wiring, Cornell concluded, examining the charred remains of the living room. Old houses require special attention. The wiring is worn out and can't handle the modern loads from all these electronic devices. The captain nodded in agreement, making notes in his notebook. "Good work, Bailey. Thanks to you, no one died today." Cornell accepted the praise with a modest nod. He didn't consider himself a hero. He was just doing his job, following protocols he had practiced for years. Saving lives was his professional duty, not a heroic feat. Returning to the station at noon, he took a shower to wash off the soot and smell of smoke, changed into a clean uniform, and sat down to fill out the necessary reports. Documentation was an important part of the job, though not his favorite. Cornell preferred to take action rather than write about his actions, but he understood the need to accurately record all the details of the fire. "Hey, Cornell!" Marcus, one of his colleagues, called out, peeking into the office door. "We're ordering pizza for lunch. Want to join us?" "No, thanks." Cornell shook his head. "I want to finish my reports and check the equipment. Maybe next time." Marcus nodded, not surprised by the refusal. Cornell had always been somewhat aloof, focused on his work, respected by his colleagues but not close to them. A true professional, but not the life of the party. After filling out the reports, Cornell methodically checked all his equipment, especially the oxygen tank and mask that had saved his life today in the smoke-filled house. Satisfied that everything was in order, he took a textbook on new fire safety regulations from the shelf and immersed himself in reading, taking notes in his notebook. His shift ended at 6 in the evening, and the thought of going home did not bring the usual relief. Once upon a time, his home had been a refuge, a place where he could recharge his batteries after a hard shift. Now it was just a building where he and Imani existed in parallel orbits, intersecting only for a formal exchange of information about everyday matters. Cornell glanced at his watch, 5:30. 30 more minutes and he could leave. He closed his textbook, put his notes in a folder, and decided to check the fire truck one more time to make sure all the equipment was in place and in working order. This meticulousness was one of the reasons his colleagues respected him. Cornell never left a job unfinished, never neglected even the smallest details that could affect someone's life. At 6 o'clock sharp, he changed into his civilian clothes, simple jeans and a dark blue shirt, and left the fire station. The sun was already setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The summer evening was warm but not muggy, with a light breeze carrying the scent of blooming linden trees from the nearby park. Cornell got into his black SUV, parked in the company parking lot, and sat there for a few minutes, gathering his strength before heading home. He turned on the radio, some tune from the 80s that he vaguely remembered from his childhood. It was strange how music could instantly transport you to another time, another life. They had bought their 2-story house in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio, 5 years ago. Cornell remembered that day in every detail: the sunny Sunday, the real estate agent with the fake smile, Imani's excitement as they looked at the spacious kitchen with an island in the middle. "This is where I'll cook Sunday dinners for the whole family," she said, hugging him. They both dreamed of children, of noisy family celebrations, of a future that seemed so clear and promising. A white picket fence, a manicured lawn, a swing set in the backyard, the quintessential American dream. The house cost all their savings and a mortgage, but they were happy. Imani had just gotten a promotion at the hospital pharmacy, and Cornell had become a lieutenant in the fire department. The future seemed bright. Cornell pulled out of the parking lot and headed home, driving through the familiar streets of the city he knew like the back of his hand. In his 15 years as a firefighter, he had been to almost every neighborhood in Columbus, putting out fires in homes and offices, rescuing people from burning buildings and cars after accidents. The city was his turf, a place where he was respected and valued. As he pulled onto the highway leading to the suburbs, Cornell turned on the air conditioning. The evening was becoming muggy, foreshadowing a thunderstorm. He glanced at the sky. Dark clouds were gathering in the west. There might be a storm tonight. Cornell had always been sensitive to changes in the weather. It was a professional skill. Dry, hot weather increased the risk of fires, especially in old wooden houses with worn-out wiring. Turning onto a quiet street in his neighborhood, Cornell felt the tension return. Here, among the neat houses with trimmed lawns and children's bicycles in the driveways, lived mostly middle-class families, doctors, teachers, lawyers. They all seemed to live ordinary, normal lives, women who didn't cheat on their husbands, men who came home to homes where they were loved and wanted. Cornell parked his black SUV in the driveway and sat in the car for a few minutes, gathering his strength. In the house next door, Mr. Jenkins, a gray-haired retiree, was trimming his hedge and waved at him. Cornell forced a smile and waved back. Maintaining the appearance of normality was becoming more difficult with each passing day. Finally, grabbing his bag, he got out of the car and headed for the house. Each step along the path, paved with decorative stones that he and Imani had chosen together, felt heavy in his chest. The front door was unlocked, another sign that Imani was home. The house greeted him with silence and the coolness of the air conditioner. The faint scent of Imani's perfume lingered in the air, a new one that Cornell hadn't bought for her. Her shoes were in the hallway, elegant, high-heeled, not the practical ones she usually wore to work, another detail that didn't fit into the usual picture. On the kitchen table was a note in Imani's neat handwriting. "Conference on new pharmaceuticals. We'll be back late. Dinner is in the fridge. Love." Cornell crumpled the note and threw it in the trash. It was the third conference in a month. At first, he didn't think much of it. Imani had always been ambitious and eager to advance her career. But something about her behavior had changed. She had become secretive, often locking her phone and responding evasively to questions about work. He took a container of lasagna out of the refrigerator, heated it in the microwave, and sat down at the table alone, listening to the ticking of the wall clock. They had always tried to have dinner together, even if one of them was late from work. Now, dinners together were rare, and when they did happen, they were awkward silences broken only by requests for salt or pepper. When did this start? A year ago? 2? Cornell couldn't say for sure. At first, the changes were minor. A new hairstyle, expensive perfume, coming home late from work. Then came the professional meetings, on weekends and conferences on weekdays. Imani began to pay more attention to her appearance, bought new clothes, and joined a fitness club. All these changes could be explained by a desire to look better, take care of her health, and advance her career. But together, they added up to a disturbing picture. Imani became a stranger. Her brown eyes, which once sparkled with laughter at the sight of her husband, now looked past him. Her slender body, which used to press against him in bed, now always ended up on the edge of the bed. Their intimate life had come to nothing a few months ago, first under the pretext of fatigue, then without any explanation. Cornell pushed away his half-eaten lasagna. He had lost his appetite. He went up to their shared office on the second floor and turned on the computer. Imani had always been careless with passwords. She used their wedding date for all her accounts. Cornell entered the 6 digits, and the screen of her work laptop came to life. Email, social media, calendar. He looked through everything, feeling dirty and dishonest, but unable to stop. The calendar did indeed have a note for today. Pharma conference, 6 o'clock, 8 p.m. But there was no mention of it in her work email. No invitation, no program, no registration confirmation. But in her personal email, he found a message with the subject line, "Today at 8, from someone named TK. Cornell's heart sank. TK, he had already seen those initials on her phone when Imani was distracted by a call from a colleague, and he accidentally noticed the message on the screen. He hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now. He opened the email, feeling his pulse quicken and his mouth go dry with a sense of foreboding. "Meet me at our place at 8. Can't wait. T." It was a short message, but it said a lot. Our place meant they already had a special place to meet. Can't wait meant there was already a certain intimacy between them. Cornell leaned back in his chair, feeling a cold rage growing inside him. 15 years of marriage. 15 years of risking his life every day to provide them with a safe, comfortable life. 15 years of loyalty, support, shared plans, and dreams. He closed his laptop and glanced at the clock. 7 o'clock. He had an hour to find out who TK was and where their place was. The decision came instantly. He would follow Imani. Cornell went downstairs, grabbed his car keys, and left the house. Imani worked at Columbus City Hospital in the pharmacy department. If the conference was just a cover, she might still be there or nearby. He got into his car and drove out of the yard, heading toward the hospital. Traffic was heavy in the evening, but Cornell knew the back roads and quickly reached his destination. Parking in the hospital parking lot, he chose a spot with a good view of the main entrance and began to watch. At 7:30 he saw her, an elegant figure in a turquoise dress he hadn't seen before. Imani emerged from the building, and Cornell's heart ached at the sight of her. Even now, suspecting her of infidelity, he couldn't help but notice how beautiful his wife was. Her dark skin glowed in the rays of the setting sun, and her gait was light, almost dancing, the way she moved in the early years of their relationship, when she was happy and in love. Imani did not head for her car, but instead crossed the street and entered the Bluebird Cafe on the opposite side. Cornell knew the place, a cozy cafe with live music in the evenings, where he and Imani sometimes had dinner on their wedding anniversary. He waited a few minutes, then got out of the car, crossed the street, and peered cautiously into the cafe window. Imani was sitting at a corner table, fixing her hair and glancing at the door. She looked nervous and excited at the same time, an expression Cornell hadn't seen on her face in a long time. She was waiting for someone, and that someone was important to her. Cornell stepped back from the window and positioned himself so that he couldn't be seen from the street, but he could watch the entrance to the cafe. At 8:05, the cafe door opened and a tall man in an impeccable suit walked in. Even from his position, Cornell could see his attractive features and confident gait. The man headed straight for Imani's table, and she lit up with a smile that she had once reserved only for her husband. Cornell felt the ground slip away beneath his feet. It was Dr. Terence Coleman, a renowned cardiologist whose photo often appeared on the hospital's honor roll, an imposing man with an impeccable reputation and, judging by his watch and suit, a considerable income. TK, now the initials had meaning and a face. Instead of storming into the cafe and causing a scene, Cornell decided to continue watching. He wanted to know the truth, the whole truth, no matter how painful it might be. He continued to watch, feeling a cold rage growing inside him. Coleman sat down next to Imani, not across from her, their knees touching under the table. He took her hand and she did not pull away. Their conversation was lively and intimate. They leaned toward each other, laughed often, and exchanged glances full of unspoken promises. When Coleman leaned in and kissed Imani, she responded with such passion that Cornell felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. This was not a friendly kiss, not a fleeting touch of the lips. It was a kiss between lovers, confident in their feelings and desires. 15 years of marriage, 15 years of shared life, plans, hopes, everything was crumbling before his eyes. Imani, whom he considered his rock, his other half, had betrayed him. And not just betrayed, she replaced him with another man, continuing to live with Cornell under the same roof, sharing his bed, looking into his eyes every morning. Cornell turned away from the window and slowly walked to his car. Something inside him died, leaving only emptiness and ringing silence. He got behind the wheel but didn't start the engine. His thoughts flowed slowly and heavily, like molten metal. What to do next? Sort things out? Get a divorce? Or pretend that nothing had happened and continue living in this farce called marriage? None of the options seemed right. He remembered the fire he had put out that morning. He remembered the faulty wiring that had reduced someone's home to ruins. He remembered how the flames had consumed room after room, how the roof had collapsed. A plan, terrible and effective, began to take shape. Cornell Bailey sat in his garage, surrounded by tools and boxes of firefighting equipment. On the workbench in front of him lay a notebook with neat notes, the result of 2 weeks of observation and planning. 2 columns of numbers showed arrival and departure times. On the left was Imani's schedule. On the right was Dr. Terrence Coleman's. Cornell ran his finger down the lines. The pattern was clear. Every Thursday, Imani stayed at the hospital until 9 in the evening, then disappeared for 2 or 3 hours. Coleman finished seeing patients at 6 on those days and also disappeared from view until late in the evening. Their place, the Bluebird Cafe, was just the beginning of the evening. Cornell hadn't yet figured out where they went after that, but it didn't matter anymore. Something else was more important. Cornell's 24-hour shift was starting next Tuesday. Imani knew this, and judging by the emails he had intercepted, she had already invited her lover to spend the evening at their house. "Terrence, we have the house to ourselves on Tuesday from 7 p.m. until morning. Cornell is on duty. Bring the wine you mentioned. Looking forward to it." Cornell closed his notebook and picked up an electrical cord with frayed insulation. He knew how the wiring in their house was laid out. He had helped the electrician install it. He knew where the distribution board was, which fuses were for which rooms, and how the cables ran inside the walls. On a shelf in the closet was a canister of lighter fluid. Cornell loved to barbecue in the backyard. Next to it was an old microwave timer that he had repaired last month but never got around to putting back. He had all the necessary components at hand. All that remained was to work out the final details and establish a solid alibi. At the same time, at the Columbus police station, Detective Malik Hampton was reviewing reports of a series of burglaries in the suburbs. Tall, with a strong build and alert eyes, he methodically made notes in his notebook, looking for patterns. 4 burglaries in a month, all within a 3-mile radius, he said without looking up. The criminals know when the owners are away. They may be watching their movements. His partner, Iris Clark, placed 2 cups of coffee on the table and sat down opposite him. An energetic woman with short hair and a penetrating gaze, she was the complete opposite of the methodical Hampton. "Or they have an informant," she suggested, sipping her coffee. "Someone who knows the residents' schedules. The mailman, the delivery guy, a utility worker?" Hampton nodded, taking the cup. "Good idea. Let's check everyone who regularly visits these areas." "There's something else. In all cases, the alarms were professionally disabled. These aren't your usual burglars. Should we take a patrol car and drive around the neighborhood tonight?" Clark suggested. "Maybe we'll notice something suspicious." "I'm in. Let's start with Oak Hills." 2 of the 4 robberies had occurred there. They didn't know that Cornell and Imani Bailey's house was in that neighborhood, or that they would soon be investigating a crime of a very different nature there. Cornell spent the weekend preparing to carry out his plan. On Saturday, he bought a new prepaid cell phone, a device that could not be traced back to him. On Sunday, he drove to a hardware store in a neighboring town and purchased a timer similar to the one used in their home electrical system, but with a small defect that could cause a short circuit. On Monday evening, while Imani was taking a shower, he slipped into the bedroom and installed a miniature camera with remote access on a bookshelf. Now he could watch what was happening in the house through an app on his new phone. Tuesday morning began as usual. Cornell got ready for his shift, kissed Imani on the cheek, a mechanical gesture they had kept up despite the gulf between them, and left for the station. 48 hours straight, he complained to his colleagues as he entered the firehouse break room. "Imani's not happy, but what can you do? It's work." It was a lie, a carefully crafted part of his alibi. Imani, of course, didn't mind him being away from home. The day dragged on. Cornell went through his duties automatically, thinking about what was going to happen that evening. At 4 o'clock, he checked the app on his new phone. The camera was working. No one was home. Imani was still at work. At 6 in the evening, he received a message. Movement in the house. Imani had returned from work earlier than usual and was getting ready for a guest. Cornell watched as she changed the bed sheets, lit candles, and set out wine glasses. Her every movement was like a knife stabbing his heart. 15 years of marriage, and this was how it was ending, with betrayal in their shared home, in their shared bed. At 7 o'clock in the evening, Cornell took his company car, telling his colleagues that he was going to check the fire hydrants in the industrial area. No one suspected anything. He often took on extra duties. Parking the car a few blocks from his home, Cornell took a bag with the necessary tools and inconspicuous dark clothing from the trunk. Quickly changing, he headed for his house through the neighbors' backyards, avoiding surveillance cameras and brightly lit areas. Detectives Hampton and Clark were patrolling the streets of Oak Hills, slowly driving past houses and noting suspicious details. "Look," Clark pointed to an unmarked van parked on the corner. "It's been here 3 nights in a row." Hampton made a note in his notebook. "Let's check the license plate. It might be our burglars on reconnaissance." They didn't notice the dark figure slipping between the houses 2 blocks away. Cornell was invisible, as a predator should be before an attack. Reaching his backyard, Cornell activated an app on his phone. The camera in the bedroom showed Imani and Terrence Coleman sitting on the edge of the bed with glasses of wine. The doctor was saying something, leaning toward Imani, and she was laughing, sincerely, carefree, the way she hadn't laughed with her husband in months. Cornell looked away from the screen and focused on the task at hand. Using his key, he made his way through the back door and silently descended into the basement. Here was the distribution board, the heart of the house's electrical system. With quick, confident movements, he set a modified timer and connected it to the wiring so that a short circuit would occur after a certain amount of time. He strategically placed rags soaked in ignition fluid next to the electrical panel. When the wiring caused a spark, they would instantly ignite. The fire would rise from the basement through the ventilation shaft to the first floor and then spread throughout the house. Cornell knew that the couple in the bedroom on the second floor would have no more than 3 or 4 minutes to notice the fire and leave the building. Considering the amount of wine they had drunk and what they were doing, there would be no time to spare. Finishing his preparations, Cornell activated the timer and silently left the house through the same back door. Now he had 20 minutes to get back to his car and establish an alibi. He was walking through the dark yards when he noticed a patrol car slowly driving down the street. Cornell froze in the shadow of a tree, watching as the police car drove past and disappeared around the corner. Coincidence? Or had someone noticed suspicious activity? Putting those thoughts out of his mind, he continued on his way. Time was running out. When he reached his service vehicle, Cornell quickly changed back into his uniform and returned to the station at exactly 8:30 p.m. "How are the hydrants?" asked the dispatcher on duty. "Everything's fine," Cornell replied, trying to keep his voice sounding normal. "I checked everything on the list and filed a report." He sat down at his computer and began filling out the hydrant inspection form, faking the data. His hands were shaking slightly, but no one noticed. Everyone at the fire station was busy with their own tasks, eating dinner, watching TV, preparing equipment. At 8:45, Cornell went into the bathroom and locked the door. Taking out his new phone, he activated the camera app. In the bedroom, Imani and Terrence had already moved on from wine to more intimate activities. Cornell turned off the image. He didn't want to see it. Now all he had to do was wait. At 8:55, the timer in the basement was supposed to go off. A spark would ignite the rags soaked in flammable liquid. The fire would quickly reach the wooden beams, rise through the ventilation system, and engulf the first floor. And it would all look like a tragic accident caused by faulty wiring. Cornell came out of the bathroom and joined his colleagues in the break room. Someone had turned on a basketball game, and everyone was discussing the game. Cornell sat down in a chair, picked up a cup of coffee, and tried to focus on the screen. Every second stretched into an eternity. At 9:05, the siren wailed. The dispatcher announced, "Fire in a residential building, Oak Hills, Maple Street, 23. Cornell's heart stopped. That was his address. Detectives Hampton and Clark were just finishing their patrol of the Oak Hills neighborhood when they saw the glow above the rooftops. "Fire!" Clark exclaimed, pointing to the orange glow. "Looks like it's a couple of blocks away." Hampton spun the car around and headed toward the fire. When they turned onto Maple Street, a horrific scene met their eyes. A 2-story house was engulfed in flames. Fire was shooting out of the first-floor windows, climbing up the walls and licking the roof. Neighbors ran out of their houses, some screaming, some already calling the fire department. "Check if anyone's inside!" Hampton shouted, jumping out of the car. Clark rushed over to the neighbors, asking them about the residents of the burning house. "Imani Bailey is in there! Her husband's on duty at the fire station!" shouted an elderly man from the next lot. At that moment, there was a deafening crash as part of the roof collapsed inward, and a column of sparks shot into the night sky. The flames completely engulfed the house, turning it into a fiery inferno. In the distance, fire engines could already be heard rushing to the scene, but Hampton and Clark, staring at the raging flames, knew that for those who might be inside, help would almost certainly come too late. A huge column of smoke rose into the night sky, visible for miles around. Bailey's house was turning to ash, taking with it the secrets and lives of those who were inside. The morning after the fire was cloudy. Gray clouds hung over the charred remains of Bailey's house, as if nature itself was mourning what had happened. Detective Malik Hampton stood at the police barrier, watching as experts in white coveralls methodically examined the ashes. "2 bodies found on the 2nd floor, in the bedroom," Iris Clark reported, approaching her partner with 2 cups of coffee. "Preliminary reports indicate a woman and a man. They're badly burned, so DNA analysis will be needed for identification, but neighbors confirmed that Imani Bailey was supposed to be in the house." Hampton took the coffee and frowned. "What about the 2nd body? Her husband was supposed to be on duty at the fire station." "Not yet. The medical examiner said the results would be in a few days." Hampton nodded and took a sip of coffee, his eyes fixed on the ruins. Something about the scene bothered him, some detail that didn't fit into the overall story of an accident. "Where is Imani's husband now?" he asked. "At the hospital." When he arrived here with the fire department and found out it was his house, he went into shock. His colleagues took him to the emergency room. "We'll talk to him as soon as the doctors say it's okay," Hampton decided. "In the meantime, let's interview the neighbors. Maybe someone saw something suspicious before the fire." They split up and began knocking on doors in the neighborhood. Most of the neighbors told the same story. They heard a crackling sound, saw the fire, and called the fire department. No one had noticed anything unusual before the fire started. The situation changed when Hampton knocked on the door of an elderly man who lived across the street. "Mr. Jenkins? Detective Malik Hampton, Columbus Police Department. Can I ask you a few questions about yesterday's fire?" A gray-haired man with a wrinkled face opened the door. "What a terrible tragedy," he muttered. "Poor Imani. So young. Did you know the Bailey family well?" 15 years as neighbors. Good people. Cornell always helped me with heavy work around the house. Imani brought homemade cookies at Christmas." "Did you notice anything unusual last night before the fire?" Jenkins hesitated, as if trying to remember something. "Actually, yes. I was walking my dog around 8 o'clock and saw someone walking through the backyards, a dark figure sneaking between the houses. I thought maybe it was one of those thieves the police warned about." Hampton tensed. "Can you describe the man?" "It was dark, but a strong man, medium height. He moved confidently, as if he knew where he was going." "And which direction was he heading in?" Jenkins pointed toward Bailey's house. "That way, toward Cornell and Imani's house." Hampton wrote down the statement and thanked the old man. Stepping outside, he ran into Clark, who also looked agitated. "Malik, I spoke to a woman 2 houses down from Bailey's. She saw a man who looked like Cornell near their house about an hour before the fire, but Cornell was supposed to be on duty at that time." The detectives exchanged glances. A suspicion, still vague, began to take shape. At the hospital, Cornell Bailey sat on the edge of his bed, staring into space. His eyes were red, his face frozen in shock. When Hampton and Clark entered, he raised his head, but didn't seem to recognize them at first. "Mr. Bailey," Hampton began softly, "we're with the Columbus Police Department's Homicide Division. We're sorry for your loss. Can we ask you a few questions?" Cornell nodded without saying a word. "You were on duty when the fire broke out, correct?" "Yes." Cornell's voice was hoarse. 24 hours since 8 o'clock Tuesday morning." "Did you leave the station during your shift?" Cornell looked at the detective, a hint of wariness flashing in his eyes, only to check the hydrants in the industrial area from 7 to 8:30 in the evening. "And you were there the whole time?" "Yes, I checked all the hydrants on the list and filed a report. The station will confirm that." Hampton nodded, making a note in his notebook. "When was the last time you spoke to your wife?" "This morning, before I left for work," Cornell swallowed. I didn't know she was expecting visitors." "Who was with her in the house?" Hampton watched Bailey's reaction closely. "We haven't identified the second body yet. Did your wife have any friends who might have visited her?" Cornell shook his head, but his eyes dropped for a moment, a sign of lying that Hampton had learned to recognize over the years. "No, I don't think so. She usually let me know if she had guests." "Mr. Bailey," Clark interjected, "were there any problems with the electrical wiring in your house?" "No," Cornell frowned. "The house was relatively new, and all the wiring was fine. I helped install it myself, so I know it was done right." "And yet the fire started in the electrical panel in the basement," Hampton pointed out. "The experts are tentatively saying it was a short circuit." Cornell didn't answer, just clenched his hands into fists. After talking to Bailey, the detectives headed to the morgue, where the medical examiner was already working on the bodies of the victims. "Female, approximately 35 years old, presumed to be Imani Bailey," the expert reported, pointing to the first body. "The second body is male, about 40 years old. Preliminary data indicates that this is not Cornell Bailey. Different build, taller. Possibly a lover," Hampton muttered. "The cause of death in both cases is carbon monoxide poisoning and burns. They were already unconscious when the fire reached the bedroom." The next day, fire experts presented their preliminary report. Hampton and Clark studied it carefully in their office. "Strange timer attached to the electrical panel," Clark noted. "Not factory-made. Someone modified it to cause a short circuit at a specific time." "And traces of accelerant on the rags near the source of the fire," Hampton added. "This wasn't an accident. It was arson. But who and why?" Hampton looked thoughtfully at the photo of Cornell Bailey in the file. "A firefighter with 15 years on the job knows exactly how to set a fire to make it look like an accident. But he has an alibi. He was on duty, checking hydrants." "We'll check that alibi," Hampton decided, "and we'll dig deeper into Bailey's personal life." Something doesn't add up here. They divided up the tasks. Clark went to the fire station to check the dispatch log and interview Cornell's colleagues, while Hampton looked into the Bailey family's personal life. By evening, they had new facts. Cornell had indeed gone out to check the fire hydrants, but he had done so suspiciously quickly and had not filled out the report immediately upon his return, as required by protocol. Moreover, surveillance cameras in the industrial area did not record the fire department's vehicle at the specified time. The second body was identified by dental records as Terrence Coleman, a cardiologist at the city hospital where Imani worked. "I checked their work email," Clark reported. "Nothing obvious, but they both worked at the same hospital and often crossed paths at meetings. In recent months, they had been having regular professional meetings in the evenings." "An affair," Hampton nodded. "That's the motive." They obtained a search warrant for Cornell's personal belongings and found a prepaid phone with a remote surveillance app in his locker at the fire station. The camera was pointed at the bedroom in Bailey's house. "He knew," Clark said quietly. "He knew about his wife's affair and planned the murder." Hampton nodded, gathering evidence into a folder. A firefighter using fire as a weapon. How ironic. They arrested Cornell Bailey the next morning as he was returning from his wife's funeral. Hampton read him his rights, and Clark handcuffed him. Cornell didn't resist, his face remaining impassive. In the interrogation room at the police station, Cornell sat motionless, staring at his hands. Hampton laid out photos from the crime scene, expert reports, and surveillance camera printouts in front of him. "We know what you did, Cornell," the detective said calmly. "The modified timer, the accelerant, your fake alibi, the hidden camera in the bedroom. You knew about your wife's affair with Dr. Coleman and decided to take revenge." Cornell looked up, his eyes empty of remorse or fear. "You don't understand," he said quietly. 15 years of marriage. 15 years I fought fires, saved people, risked my life. And she brought him into our home, into our bed. "That doesn't justify murder," Clark said. "I know," Cornell said, lowering his head. "But in that moment, when I saw them together, something inside me broke. I stopped being the Cornell Bailey I had been for 15 years. I became someone else, someone capable of using fire not to save, but to destroy." "Tell us how it happened," Hampton suggested, turning on the tape recorder. And Cornell told him how he suspected her of cheating, how he followed her, how he saw her with Coleman in a cafe, how he planned the arson using his professional knowledge, how he broke into the house, set the timer, and placed rags soaked in fuel around the room, how he watched the fire from a distance before returning to the station. "I didn't want them to suffer," he said. "The fire was supposed to spread quickly. The smoke would knock them unconscious before they felt any pain. I knew how it worked. I knew what I was doing." When the confession was recorded, Hampton turned off the tape recorder and looked at the man in front of him, not a monster, not a cold-blooded killer, but a broken man whose life had gone off the rails because of one terrible decision. "The court finds you guilty of first-degree murder," the detective said. "Double murder with premeditation. You will spend the rest of your life in prison." Cornell nodded, accepting his fate. "You know, detective," he said, looking Hampton in the eye, "the worst thing is not that I killed them. The worst thing is that I feel no remorse, only emptiness. It's as if the fire burned everything inside me before I set the house on fire." When Cornell was led away, Hampton remained seated at the table, staring at the case file. Iris Clark sat down next to him. "Are you okay?" she asked. Hampton shook his head slowly. 15 years of saving people from fire, only to end up using it as a weapon. A man who knew the destructive power of fire better than anyone else deliberately unleashed that power. "Jealousy," Clark shrugged. "One of the oldest and most powerful emotions." "It's not just jealousy," Hampton objected. "At some point, he crossed the line. He went from protector to destroyer. The professional skills that were supposed to save lives became a tool for murder." He gathered the papers into a folder and closed it. The Cornell Bailey case was solved, the killer had confessed, and was awaiting trial. But Hampton knew that this story would stay with him for a long time. A reminder of how thin the line is between creation and destruction, between salvation and annihilation. "We're done here," he said, standing up. "Let's go, Iris. We have other cases to attend to." They left the interrogation room, leaving behind the story of a man who had spent his entire life fighting fire, only to become an arsonist himself. A man whose rage and pain at betrayal had turned into a flame that consumed not only those he wanted to punish, but his own soul as well. Cornell Bailey was taken to the county jail, where he would await trial for double murder. A firefighter turned killer, a protector turned destroyer. A man who knew the power of fire and used it to destroy lives, those of others and his own.